Welcome to Something More with Chris Boyd. Chris Boyd is a certified financial planner practitioner and senior vice president and financial advisor at Wealth Enhancement Group, one of the nation's largest registered investment advisors. We call it Something More because we'd like to talk not only about those important dollar and cents issues, but also the quality of life issues that make the money matters matter. Here he is, your fulfillment facilitator, your partner in prosperity, advising clients on Cape Cod and across the country. Here's your host, J. Christopher Boyd.
Welcome. This is Something More with Chris Boyd. I'm here with team members, Jeff Perry and Russ Ball. We are all of the AMR team at Wealth Enhancement and glad to have you with us. Today, we're talking about the wall of worry. The market climbs a wall of worry is an ism that we hear about often, and the market seems to be doing just that. So we thought we'd talk a little bit about some of the reasons and some of the issues and just give some thoughts around what's going on in the investment world around us. We got tariffs, we've got Middle East conflicts, we've got all these. Is Iran considered the Middle East, by the way?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. All of these kinds of issues. We can maybe go through some of, why don't we start with that? A little bit about what are some of the worries that people are facing? I feel like our clientele come in routinely and mention various concerns and are looking for reassurances along the way and thinking, how are we handling these and how are we positioning for them?
Well, I think you're right, Chris. The breadth of clients, we meet with clients practically every day, practically all day in some cases, some days, right?
Right. Feels like
And
that.
we meet with clients who are young, just starting out. We meet with clients who are in their accumulation years, and we meet with clients who are retired. So we really get not purposefully, but we really get a snapshot of what people are concerned about and worried about. And there are very consistent patterns. And they tend to run with the news cycle, right? So a few weeks ago, a month ago, whatever it was, I lose track, it was the tariffs. What will be the impact on the economy and the market on the tariffs?
Early April, right?
Right.
What was the name? Liberation Day.
Liberation Day. That's right.
They coined the phrase. So,
and then I was just going to run through them if you want.
Yeah, go for it. Run through them. We'll come back and talk about them all. Yeah.
Yep. Well, we can even go back before that. After President Trump took office, he was attempting to implement many of his campaign promises, et cetera. And so depending on where you are politically or where you are in your employment, in some cases, you might have been worried about effects to the employment market. Immigration certainly was another big one. And then we ran into the tariff wall, so to speak. And then we got this crisis in the Middle East where, as we well know, Israel made a preemptive strike because of the intelligence related to Iran having a nuclear weapon.
Yeah, I mean, you could categorize it more broadly with wars, because before that we were dealing with still, Israel dealing with Palestine, so Hamas, right? And then
and all Iran's proxies.
Yeah.
Right? So broadly defined as Middle East. Yeah, I think that's accurate. And
Russia or Ukraine continues to, be an ongoing source of instability, let's say.
That's right. Plenty of things to worry about there, and both of those wars, crises, whatever, conflicts have to do not just with security and potential terrorism, but have to do with the energy markets. And certainly that impacts the global economy. And in the middle of all this, we have a big, beautiful bill trying to work its way through Congress, and all the pros and cons of that. The tax relief, the giveaways, I'll call them, too many giveaways, the impacts to the national debt and deficit, and also in that big, beautiful bill deals with temporarily, but deals with the debt ceiling, which is a common thing that the markets get and then nodding about. And then Moody's downgrades the national debt.
That's a good point.
So, and I'm sure I'm not getting them all. I'm
and there might be more. Yeah. All right. So there's all these variables that are of concern. Do you want to weigh in on this before I chime in? Things that you're hearing about, or?
Well, I mean, I know recently, like just prior to the Iran conflict that's going on, the protests in California were a big topic in people's minds, and immigration and all that.
Civil unrest,
Are
right?
being sent over to California. So it seems like there's an endless stream of headlines that are making waves and making people worried, I would say.
Good points. Yeah. So let's kind of pick at some of these things and dig into them a little, and then let's come back to some of the context of all this, because again, a lot of this, what's relevant is how it fits into an individual's financial plan, but we still spend a lot of time thinking about these issues, and as advisors, we spend a lot of time thinking about how it should impact one's portfolio or not. So, you talked about the immigration maybe as the starting point, or earliest in the sequence of events. There definitely has been some adjustment of the positioning as it relates to the deportation of certain types of workers that might be here illegally. Seems like there's been some rhetoric around maybe not as much focus on farm workers or people who are workers, but right now there hasn't been much discernment between people here illegally in one form or another. It seems like there's been an effort to just get anyone out who's not here illegally. I
think that's accurate. And if we haven't made this realization yet, I think we really need to. And maybe the market has. Maybe the market has before we have. And that is a policy statement or a position of the Trump administration, when announced, is probably going to change. Right? So, whether it's the immigration thing or whether it's the big, beautiful bill or whatever these policies are, they do tend to change. They're not as grand at the end of the story, right? So
traditionally, you would expect what the president says to be intended to be taken at its face value.
Literally,
the president would say what he means, and that would be policy,
or at least efforts to continue to get to that policy.
Yeah. Whereas with the Trump administration, the notion of deal making and the art of the deal, or whatever the book was, that maybe that's not always the case. Is where you're going with that?
Exactly. Exactly on that. Well, the initial stance were on immigration, but we can make the same
tariff
comment to tariffs, right? This is what it's going to be. This is it. And then change it. And sometimes seemingly change it for no purpose that we know about anyway, but just a different adjustment in the strategy. And initially, we had a lot of market turmoil based upon some of these statements.
Well, for a week, they were like, there's not going to be any postponement of this. This is it. We're going to need deals right away. And then bond market reacted and, well, we're going to push this off 90 days.
Right. So maybe
maybe a month later, we're going to push this off for 90 days.
So maybe the market has figured this out, because it does not appear to be responding as it normally would or previously would based upon any given crisis.
I would put it a different way. You can't believe what's being told. That's part of the frustration of this, is that, on the one hand, you take at face value what's being said, and then it turns out, no, that's not really what's intended. And you discern what's really meant and what's not really meant. It's such a frustrating way to deal with things. And this notion that in foreign affairs that, well, people keeps people on their toes, but also means people don't know what to expect. So sometimes they're going to there's a danger that you're going to have misfire of what one person's thinking and versus what one person's saying, and what's going to actually be the case, how it's going to play out. I think it's scary, personally. I think it's bad bad way to do business, but and as a leader of a nation, I hope that can change, but I don't think it is. I agree. I think you're right that that's the modus operandi of this administration. That it's a little bit of keep you guessing, keep you on your toes, and trying to navigate with like, oh, we'll put something really outlandish on and see how much we can get, and then we'll get something and we'll feel good about that. And then it's better than where we started kind of mindset when it comes to tariffs. That was kind of the essence of what you were saying to me yesterday about some of this.
Yep, generally, and whether or not you are a supporter of the president or not a supporter, even if you believe this is the art of the deal and you like what he's doing, still should have the position where you can't rely on it, right?
Yeah.
Or if you're a critic of the president and you don't like what he's doing, you would have the same position. And so, under the theme of climbing the wall of worry, as the market has been, down from that correction or however we want to characterize it,
April or whatever,
or that reaction to the tariffs,
both in anticipation and then at the announcement, the market was starting to decline, but then it declined more precipitously, close to 20%, not quite from its peak.
So you wonder, like, if the president,
that's right back to where we were, right?
Right, or in some cases higher,
maybe higher. Yeah.
Right. So you wonder what the market would have the market responded basically the same way in April if the president said, we're going to have a 30% tariff across the board unless we make another deal with someone.
Yeah, would the market be saying, "Oh, that's great. Look at where we are today." Okay, we're at highs or near highs. We're recording on June 26th.
Mm-hmm.
Happy anniversary, Kristen.
That was your anniversary.
Yes. Happy anniversary. So anyway, so we're things can change. So, but as far as this tariff element is concerned, I think you make a good point. If you just came out and said 30% across the board, or is it 30 plus 10 maybe, or whatever it is?
Whatever it is, right?
That it might have been received in a different way, where it'd be, whereas opposed to, oh, we're not going to have 145% tariff on China. Well, maybe that's good. We don't know that that's the case, though. That's the thing that I keep coming back to. We are assuming that there will be deals. I mean, it seems like we're moving in that direction. But right now, it's just been, we've delayed. We've postponed. Now, what happens in July? I think it's the 9th when the 90 days expires from the time this delay was postponed to some time.
Well, the date
sorry.
The date doesn't even mean anything. I mean, if you analogize this to the TikTok,
will it be extended again, or will it be more rattling the cage? Oh, we're going to be sticking it to everyone who doesn't meet, get an agreement right away or something. Again, is it really what's going to happen, or is it just sort of intended to move people to some kind of intended objective? You were going to say about TikTok?
Well, TikTok is a good analogy because we had a date. This is the third extension to the TikTok deal. And so that just gets pushed down the road. And I'm not trying to be critical of President Trump. I think he's had some good successes. But he does do this. And many times when he gave Iran up to 2 weeks to respond, the news media correctly pointed out that he says 2 weeks a lot.
Yeah.
He puts it out there 2 weeks over and over again. So you can't rely on not just the policy, but you can't rely on the date either.
So let's talk about the Iran action, the decision to drop bunker busters and so forth on the Iranian nuclear sites. On the plus side, hopefully this has material consequence to limit Iran's ability to actually create a nuclear weapon, which I think everybody is concerned would not be a good thing for the world order, whether it because of escalation of a nuclear arms race in the Middle East, or because of the concerns of what would Iran actually do, whether through proxies or whatever, right? The Israel security, all that. My issue with the whole process was procedural in a sense. I do think that's essentially an act of war. And whether it's been declared as a war or not, that's essentially an act of war. I don't recall, I'm sure there are instances, but I don't recall instances where we did something similar where we had this kind of action without congressional consent or what's the right term? Not consent. Giving the four leaders of Congress a heads up on this kind of thing, and whether or not you can point to some instances where we've struck back at people who, when there's been some kind of a retaliatory strike. I think that's not uncommon, I think, but this was, I would argue it's preemptive. I think you and I were kind of would be willing to argue that point a little bit, but because of all the proxy activities and so forth that Iran uses, but I don't know, this just seemed pretty substantial to me as a military action. It's at this point it's a celebrated military action, and no critique of the military and the way things were exercised or anything like that. I just look at it as thinking, from a governance point of view, is this really the way we want potentially engage in a war without some congressional engagement, that kind of thing?
Well, you and I do disagree on this, and I could point to many examples under many presidents, including Thomas Jefferson, who had a military action against the Barbary pirates without congressional action, all the way through Syria and Libya and etc. And I think this is a real issue that Congress needs to deal with. And I don't mean because of the actions of President Trump. I mean because of the actions of numerous presidents.
Well, that may be the right answer. It may not be specific to President Trump, but just that notion of where do you draw that line as to what is permissible within presidential power,
right,
as an office without the consent of Congress, who actually is empowered to declare war.
Right. And Article 2, where the president has the authority to defend the country and be the commander in chief. And it's tough to reconcile those two. If you have just for sake of discussion, without talking specifically about this case, but if you have a credible threat to the United States that is imminent, that intelligence shows is imminent, and we have threats to our country, our bases, our allies, should the president be able to act without telling members of Congress, who may or may not, keep it to themselves, so to speak?
Yeah. Would you consider this one of those occasions?
I do, because I have to, because I don't have any other evidence. Although we can be skeptics and say question the intelligence, but I am told through our government that they had credible evidence that Iran was on the edge or about to have nuclear weapon capability. And in fact, they went over at the Pentagon briefing this morning. It was very enlightening. If people haven't seen it, I would encourage you to look at it. They talk about that this particular process of this particular site, the monitoring of it and the strategy in the government started 15 years ago. when they saw what was being built, and they actually built these bunker bombs for this site.
Mhm. Mhm.
So if I believe my government, which I tend to do, but open-minded, and it's a credible threat, I want my president to have the ability to eliminate a threat to our bases, our military service members overseas, and our allies without having to go to Congress to tell them, what the plan is, basically. And
And
the
I
war.
guess the notion of imminent is maybe probably relevant in that
Well, let's say
equation.
it's not imminent. Let's say it's within the next month. I still struggle with telling members of Congress what we're asking permission to do this, and giving our enemies time to listen to the public debate in Congress about
Yeah, yeah.
that. The War Powers Act doesn't require it. It requires notification within 48 hours of Congress, and a limit of 60 days to hostilities. So, is that the right balance? I don't know. But if this is an issue that Congress is worried about, I mean, one thing that you and I agree on is Congress has delegated, is negligent, whatever it is, on all these things that they end up complaining about afterwards.
Yeah.
Congress has the power to change the War Powers Act if they choose to. And I doubt they will. I doubt they'll complain. And if it was a Democratic president doing it, as it has been in the past, the Republicans complain about it. And then the Republicans get in power and they don't do anything about it, and vice versa.
Yeah, because
So,
I don't want the limitation on there. Yeah, I gotcha. But well, in any case, this I think this is a really interesting discussion. I'm kind of into it, but I want to bring it back to what we were originally talking about, was the idea of the wall of worry and markets' reaction to it. And I think there were other things besides this. Now, this seems to be presently in a ceasefire. I think there's question in, like, will it last?
what is
Is
the
that
Middle
the end of
East?
it? Yeah, right. Is that the end of hostilities, or will there be more of a retaliatory response? There was a modest retaliatory response on one of our bases. Was a Qatar. Qatar, how do you say that properly?
Telegraphed and planned, and
Yeah, it's pretty
Yeah.
widely known. So, in any case, seems surprising to me that would be the extent of the retaliation, but fingers crossed that it is, right.
absolutely.
But in any case, but at the same time, my worry would be like, oh, what if there's some kind of cyber attack, or that kind of thing? What kind of
Terrorist attack, sure.
terrorist attack? What kind of response might there be in a way that's less militarily defendable? You know what I mean? But maybe more disruptive to our economy, I guess. But you wanted to comment?
Yeah, I think another one of my concerns with this specifically is I was reading it, like it sounds like we didn't do that much damage to the nuclear capabilities. I was reading something that said we set them back maybe a few months by hitting some of the tunnels. And if that is the case, then if we didn't really obliterate the nuclear facilities that are in Iran, then we just drop bombs on some of that might have nuclear capabilities in the next several months. So, yeah, I feel like you're never going to know for sure if you're going to do the damage that you expected, but it is just a kind of looming thought. Like,
yeah, that whole issue seems to be one that's in flux. Because they're still getting the data on how much damage really was done, and that was some of the conversation this morning's.
It was, and I agree with the general. It was it was disappointing in the Secretary of Defense. I think it's disappointing that story was released. It was based upon just the initial internal data that someone leaked, and it had a low confidence, etc. No one's going to know until somebody's actually there.
Yeah,
because it's all underground. Based upon the presentation made this morning, I have greater confidence that it was destroyed. And they didn't say that. I just, on the presentation that they made about the weapons and about the plan and about the execution of it, it seems like it would have to be, but we'll have to wait.
Yeah.
Some positive things that came out of the conflict, though, is that North Korea, China, Russia, the axis of evil, however you want to describe
Yeah,
this group,
what we used, yeah, of course.
right? None of them, none of their Iran's allies did anything to support them.
Yeah.
In fact, they did the opposite, at least with their public statements, and they didn't seem to even rattle their swords, so to speak,
Well,
saying,
and Russia seemed to say we'll help Iran get nuclear capabilities, didn't they?
I if they did, I didn't see that, but no one did anything meaningful, which I think is a positive for the region itself. And so, at the end of the day, if the ability of Iran and their proxies to be disruptive in the Middle East or have a nuclear program, whether it's set back 6 months, 6 years, or forever, I think is a positive thing. And then at the same time, the NATO conference was going on, and it seemed like, based upon the news reports, that it was a very productive NATO conference with President Trump reassuring NATO that we are a part of NATO and we would defend any NATO country. And all but one, I believe, of the NATO countries agreeing to that 5% of GDP, their GDP spending. And that's, by itself, if we didn't have all this other stuff in the news, I think that would be the headline news about NATO getting along so well and making these commitments to being a strong and vibrant partnership. So at the end of the day, if this holds, and I share your potential concerns, Chris, but if this holds as it is today, it's the world is a better place because the United States acted to to deter a threat or eliminate a threat, or however we want to characterize it.
Yeah. So I think we'll know more within a short time. A couple of weeks, we'll probably have a better sense of what's the real damage that was done, whether or not there'll be more retaliatory response. So I think this is one of those. Let's give it a little time and see where we're at. Similarly, with the tariffs, we've got June 9th looming. About a month after that is the China. I think we'll get a sense of, from the extension that was originally done in April for most countries, where we stand. Will the administration kind of kick the can another 90 days or something like that to bide time for finalizing some of these negotiations that may be in place? And then that might give us an indication of, well, that's probably what would happen with China as well, right? So presumably, so we'll have maybe within a few weeks have a sense of what's coming there. Additionally, this tax bill is in the thick of it. Perhaps even by the time our episode airs, there could be movement on this. We don't know whether it's going to succeed or fail. Essentially, the House passed a version of the bill, the One Big Beautiful Bill. We talked about that in a prior episode, some of the features of that. The Senate is in the throes of its negotiations as it relates to this. There are discrepancies of how these will be dealt with, and that's the nature of how the process works. The Senate will have to pass its version of the bill. That will bring it back to the House to vote, I guess, on reconciling whether they, can live with something that comes out of that. It's a tenuous process, and it's unknown. And I gather there's features in the bill that go far beyond just a tax bill, a budget deal. But essentially, it seems that as if they can keep the Republican numbers in line. I think we've got, was it one senator who clearly indicated he's not going to vote for this? That leaves them maybe two that, and then you've got the vice president as a tie, if there's a tie, but is that what it is? There's like 52 maybe then that would be in favor if they can keep it together.
I think the bill passes the Senate, and as you've said before, the House vote, when it went to the Senate, passed by one vote. One vote.
Yeah.
I think that the senators are working this weekend. I think they're going to get it passed, whether or not JD Vance has to be the tying vote. I don't know. I think probably not, but I think the real challenge to the bill is when it comes back into the House. There's a lot of renegade Republicans, and that's not a derogatory term. For some people, it's a good thing.
There's been more attention to some of the details in the meantime.
Right.
That could cause some people to say, oh, I don't really like this or that.
Yeah.
You got that group who are focused on the SALT tax component of it. That's not coming back, it seems, the way they want.
Right.
There's all different elements that, you could say, I don't like
pockets,
this, I don't like that, right? Not enough spending cuts, too many spending cuts on Medicaid or Medicare, rather. You got these different schools of thought. So I think it's going to be challenging to see how that gets resolved, but there's a lot of political pressure
for sure
within, a party to move things. So, but again, we should probably have a better sense of this uncertainty within a week or two as to, whether this is likely to pass or not.
And that's even an artificial date. I mean, it's a date set, but this is the bill. This is the bill for October.
Yeah, it's a good point. That being said, there's a debt ceiling date. I want to say August. I mean, we're already past the point at which they're doing the emergency measures and all that, but we got a drop dead date, so to speak, of somewhere in August. That if this didn't get passed, well, now we've got a whole new debt ceiling challenge to deal with, and strong views about whether or not to raise the debt ceiling, which is essentially the willingness to pay the debts we owe because our interest costs keep pushing the debt higher, in addition to even if we keep everything else the same, essentially, right? So we've got a challenge that either the debt ceiling needs to be increased or we might have defaults in some form or fashion. And as the Treasury secretaries in the past have said, they don't have the authority to prioritize some of these obligations that may exist. So you'd have some real issues of who gets paid.
I don't think the market could climb that wall. If that actually happened, that would be.
I think that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be devastating to our credibility as a nation, our credit as a nation, and the market itself.
Mm-hmm. Add to that right now, valuations. I point to PEs. I know Brian's not a big fan of PE ratios. When we talked to Brian Regan, our team's senior portfolio manager, but it's a commonly utilized reference point for talking about whether the market is how it's valued, and in relative terms at 21, almost 22 times forward earnings, the market arguably is a little bit expensive. You could make a case for interest rates and all these variables that could justify some of that, growing artificial intelligence and all the rest of there's things to look to and say, oh, isn't this positive? But there are a lot of uncertainties. It's kind of it's priced for perfection, I guess you might say. And
I think that's a good way to say it.
We have a lot of these variables that are in the mix that may go the way we expect or the way the market likes. As we had a conversation internally, we're talking with Brian about this, and we'll talk about some of this with him next week as well. For those who would be interested in listening, we'll be talking about some market related topics with Brian Regan next week. The trend for as you were talking about with tariffs is favorable. There's a lot of these things you look at the way they seem to be shaping up is encouraging. But I think there's still some. Will earnings increase to the point to cause the PE to come down? Well, tariffs could be a factor in that, and
definitely,
and so forth. You know what I mean? There's some variables that we don't know the answers to yet.
In any market, the market can be irrationally exuberant. There's a quote from Alan Greenspan, or it can be too pessimistic, right? So, and I think in this case, it's
It's exuberant. Whether
It's
it's irrational or not, we'll reserve judgment.
time will tell, but it is a bit precarious, I think, at times when the market gets ahead of itself, and we assume that it's always going to be that way.
So let's turn our attention to, as we wrap up. I mean, I know we're going a little long. We'll try to wrap this up quickly. So what's an investor to do? How do I plan for this? How do I think about it? Big picture, control the controllables. What are the controllables? Well, one of those is your asset allocation. If you're concerned about volatility, if you're not a long-term investor in one sense, that is different from someone who's a long-term investor. If I'm Russ here in my 30s, I got a long time to invest, right? If I'm someone in my 80s, I might be more concerned about how long it takes for markets to recover.
That's right.
We had markets decline by 20% almost earlier this year, and we're already talking about they're back to highs. Things can happen quickly, but they don't always happen quickly. Right. And sometimes it takes years for markets to recover, if you will. So we get more concerned about that as we age naturally. So one of the things we might want to think about is, one, do we have our liquidity, sufficient reserves in place? Two, so we like to think in terms of buckets. We've talked about this a lot, but graduated levels of risk. And for the portion of our portfolio that's longer term in nature, that's where we want more risk, depending on your particular temperament for how much you can tolerate. But this is a good time to reassess, what's my tolerance for volatility? And if I say I can tolerate a bear market, that's a 20% decline. Turn it from a percentage number to a dollar number. Oh, if my account went down by X dollars, 20%, do the math. How do I feel about that? Can I tolerate? Can I stomach that? If the answer is no, and just because we say a bear market is 20% doesn't mean it can't go down 30% or whatever, right? So, be doing a little bit of the forethought of how much can I really stomach? And if that answer to that is, that really makes me uncomfortable, maybe you want to adjust your allocation a little bit. Yeah, there can be tax events and all of that, and that's true, but better to capture something and have a gain and a tax event than to have it go down if you can't stomach it going down, right? So now's when markets are at or near highs. Now's a great time to be revisiting what's my allocation comfort zone. And so control the controllables. We can't control everything. We can't control what's going to happen with the tax bill. We can't control what's going to happen with tariffs and war in the Middle East. All of these are things that are a little bit outside our control. What we can control is how much risk are we comfortable with? Do we have the cash flows we need? Do we have liquidity to meet our needs for the next couple of years if we're retired? Maybe 6 months if we're not retired. Do we have things in place to give us the willingness and ability to stay the course on our intended objective? Put it all into a financial plan to help you navigate this. If you need help with a financial plan, that's where we come in. What did you guys want to say? Because I tried to throw a lot in there quickly.
Well, just on the financial planning topic, I feel like I've talked about this before, the stress testing of the financial plan. So a lot of people are worried about the market right now. So we're talking about, what if the market went down 20%? Rather than looking at it on an account-to-account basis, you can take it all into one picture in your financial plan, see what would happen if the market went down 20% tomorrow.
Is your plan compromised?
Yeah.
Or does it still work?
Right. And big picture, yes, there's a lot of uncertainty in the near term. Big picture, over your lifetime, how does this shape out, even if the market does drop 20, 30% in the next few days? And we can model that out and see what that would look like. Yeah,
good point. So financial plan stress test can really make a difference in your sense of peace of mind as you're dealing with your plan, because in most cases, a lot of cases anyway, when we work with our clientele, we do this stress test and we see, yes, it has an effect, but not so great that it's should be so concerning, you
Yeah.
know, or if it is, well, that's educational, that's informative. Maybe we should make some accommodation to plan for that.
Exactly.
Jeff?
Speaking about the uncontrollables, I think that's what drives our emotions sometimes, especially in these times of high stakes and high interest news items. People tend to get more focused in on the news and sit there and watch it and worry about it. And, one of the best things about having a financial advisor, and, you talk about the Vanguard study a lot, Chris, is that um, a financial advisor can assist you when you're having those urges that you feel you need to do something. Sometimes the best
Yeah.
thing to do is nothing, as you said correctly. Sometimes the best thing to do is something, but it can.
Yeah,
By
it doesn't
talking
have to be to do anything. It's a great point. Sometimes your best bet is just stay the course.
Yeah.
You because you have a plan that works.
But left to our own devices, sometimes if you're not working in the field and you don't understand the history of it all and your own financial plan that's created by your trusted financial advisor, sometimes your behavior is driven by these emotions and you make decisions that
We can
are
tend
wholesale
over-
decisions. I have to get out of this.
Yeah. We can overreact, right?
Yeah, we can overreact, which has devastating impacts to your plan long term in many cases. So, that behavioral stuff that maybe you didn't walk into your financial advisor when you met with them and hired them and been working with them, maybe that wasn't top of mind. Like, oh, I need this because I could have some worries that would be irrational at some point. But having that check and that person to sit down, as Russ indicated, and go over your plan and review it and say, does this matter? That's where the super amount of value comes in from having a fiduciary that you're working with.
Yeah. Well, and when it comes to some of these things, when it comes to the worries of the moment, that can be part of the value where your financial advisor, your portfolio manager, when the way they navigate that, looking for opportunities, can benefit you or risks, but they can be positioning the portfolio. Maybe that's where you say, I control the things I can control, but I'm having professional management to help me navigate some of these other things to identify when there's risks or opportunities that they can position things so that we benefit from those possibilities.
Yeah, some tactical things at different times that Brian has been very successful at seeing these opportunities and not making wholesale changes to the base case, but to take
Right.
advantage of some opportunities that may be short-lived or long-term.
Yeah, particularly when there is disruption in the market,
Right.
that's when it's least likely that we're going to want to, but there could be some significant opportunities to take advantage of.
Absolutely.
Well, in any case, if we can be a resource to you along the way, don't hesitate to reach out to us. Our team is here to help with a financial plan and when desired, portfolio management. Until next time, everybody, keep striving for something more.
Thank you for listening to Something More with Chris Boyd. Call us for help, whether it's for financial planning or portfolio management, insurance concerns, or those quality of life issues that make the money matters matter. Whatever's on your mind, visit us at somethingmorewithchrisboyd.com or call us toll free at 866-771-8901 or send us your questions to amr-info@wealthenhancement.com. You're listening to Something More with Chris Boyd Financial Talk Show. Wealth Enhancement Advisory Services and J. Christopher Boyd provide investment advice on an individual basis to clients only. Proper advice depends on a complete analysis of all facts and circumstances. The information given on this program is general financial comments and cannot be relied upon as pertaining to your specific situation. Wealth Enhancement Group cannot guarantee that using the information from this show will generate profits or ensure freedom from loss. Listeners should consult their own financial advisors or conduct their own due diligence before making any financial decisions.